This is the newest land in all of North America. Shaping its past and controlling its future is the mighty Mississippi, the third longest river in the world and the main avenue of commerce in the United States. Along the lower coast, bordering either side of the river, is one of this planet's most dynamic ecosystems, the estuary of South Louisiana. On the west bank of the river in Plaquemines Parish is Woodland, the last in a long line of sugar plantations below New Orleans. This is deep Delta country. This fertile delta region was born of the last ice age when a continental glacier covered most of North America. 15,000 years ago, a period of rapid global warming radically altered the landscape. With the Appalachian Mountains to the east and the Rockies to the west, the glacial meltoff sought the lowest elevation of land, cutting a channel for a great river through the central part of the continent. The Café au lait colored river carried sediment from what are now 2 Canadian provinces and 31 states, creating delta splays or fingers of new land masses reaching into the Gulf. About the time the first Olympic Games were held in Athens, Greece, the Mississippi added nearly 2,000 square miles to coastal Louisiana, forming the Teche Delta. As the Teche Valley filled in, closing off the avenue to the Gulf, the Mississippi jumped course. The new St. Bernard Delta pushed out the eastern boundary of the state. The city of New Orleans now sits on a crescent of this 3,000 square mile parcel of riverborne land. Like a snake slithering back and forth, another westward turn of the river yielded another delta, the nutrient-rich Lafourche Delta. Some 700 years ago, the Mississippi headed back to the old St. Bernard riverbed, breaking through the natural levee and spilling miles of alluvial soil over the shallow continental shelf. The first Plaquemines Delta resembled the stalk-like legs of a bird. A century later, the raging waters running through the upper boundary of present-day Plaquemines Parish carried so much silt that the mouth of the Mississippi moved southward. Known as Head of Passes, the Birdfoot Delta, with claw-like talons, grasp for each ounce of nutrient-rich soil before it's lost to the Gulf.
Native American called this delta region Plaquemines. It was in reference to the fruit of the persimmon trees that grew in the rich alluvial soil. In the beginning of the 16th century, European explorers started to come. They wanted to leave their mark in this new land. They also wanted to lay claim to the river that ran through it.
Sailing along the Gulf Coast in 1519, Alonso Alvarez de Pineda logged the opening to a very large and very deep stream, christening it Rio del Espiritu Santo, River of the Holy Spirit. In 1539, Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto also located the river, but died before reaching its mouth. In 1682, Frenchman René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de La Salle, began a descent of the river he called Colbert. On the morning of April 9th, La Salle and his band reached the present-day Head of Passes, noting that he found 3 channels by which the river discharges itself into the sea. Believing that we are the first Europeans who have descended or ascended the great river, La Salle planted a cross. Naming the vast territory Louisiane for his king, Louis XIV, he claimed all: the seas, harbors, ports, bays, nations, people, towns, villages, mines, minerals, and fisheries for Bourbon, France. A decade and a half later, the French government dispatched Pierre Le Moyne, Sieur d'Iberville, to colonize New France. On March 3, 1699, Shrove Tuesday, Iberville and his men made camp at the first large bend in the river. History records the spot as Point du Mardi Gras. Iberville's 19-year-old younger brother, Jean-Baptiste Le Moyne, Sieur de Bienville, also had a significant first. The bold teenager single-handedly turned back the English. Paddling in a small canoe, Bienville was startled to encounter the English ship Carolina Galley with 12 cannons anchored in front of him. The quick-witted youngster warned the English captain that this territory was heavily guarded by French troops around the next bend, and that he and his ship would be wise to head back to the open sea. The bluff worked, and to this day the area is designated as English Turn. To prevent any future such encounters with other colonial naval powers, older brother Sieur d'Iberville ordered the building of the first French fortification at Poverty Point. With a battery of 6 small guns, the little Fort de Belay, or Fort of the Mississippi, was situated on a low ridge 38 miles below present-day New Orleans. Floodwaters from the Mississippi forced Iberville to abandon it a year later. Nonetheless, the French had established a firm foothold in the New World. In 1803, after almost 3 centuries of domination by European colonial governments, the Louisiana Purchase placed the mighty Mississippi squarely under the control of the fledgling United States government. But the battle for the navigational rights to the main avenue of commerce in the Louisiana territories was not over. During the Civil War, Union gunboats and Confederate forces engaged in ferocious combat to control access to the mouth of the river. Under Commodore Farragut, the Union fleet prevailed. Today, Fort Jackson in Lower Plaquemines Parish stands as a silent sentinel, a testament to battles won and lost, and the importance of the river to the American economy. Between the decades of feuding over the lush lands bordering the river, indigo, rice, orange, and sugar plantations began to thrive as settlers saw crops blossom in this fertile region. Sugar barons built palatial homes in an era of ready cash, yet hurricanes, fires, flood, and crop failure took their toll. Today on the west bank of the river, 34 miles below New Orleans' fabled French Quarter, a solitary holdout remains to guard their stories.
Few plantations have endured with a tale as turbulent as that of Woodland. For a time, it seems as this lovely Delta lady would live on only as the antebellum on a bottle. For Woodland is the very plantation captured on each and every label of Southern Comfort, the grand old drink of the South. And how did Woodland survive when all other West Bank plantations vanished? And how did this Southern belle end up on a liquor bottle? The answer to this convoluted tale lies with her first owner, sea captain and river pilot William Johnson.
Arriving in Louisiana in the 1780s from Nova Scotia, Captain Johnson and his partner George Bradish went to work for Spanish river pilot Juan Ronquillo. A decade later, in 1793, Johnson and Bradish pooled their resources to build Magnolia Plantation in Lower Plaquemines. Just prior to the Louisiana Purchase, the successful seafaring duo acquired Ronquillo's river monopoly, becoming America's first chief river pilots. As William Johnson's family grew, he acquired land upriver from Magnolia at West Point-de-la-Hache. With the river periodically overflowing its banks, the ship captain made sure his new family home, to be known as Woodland Plantation, was square and true. On both ends, 2 large chimneys acted as anchors. Inside, spacious quarters showcased a gracious lifestyle. Upon approaching his 70s, William Johnson retired, leaving Woodland to his eldest son, George Washington Johnson, who managed the 2,100-acre sugar plantation until his death in 1856. In his living will, George Johnson left Woodland to younger brother Bradish with several stipulations. Bradish must free the slaves, provide each with $50 and passage back to Liberia. But Bradish remained largely an absentee landlord, splitting his time between townhouses in New York and New Orleans. With the outbreak of the Civil War, the diplomatic Bradish used his dual role of Yankee businessman and Southern planter to safeguard Woodland. Bradish persuaded the U.S. Provost Marshal to set up headquarters at the plantation, sparing Woodland from the destruction suffered by so many of her Louisiana neighbors. After the war, the United States Department of Interior hired journalists Ralph Keeler and Alfred Woad to survey the effects of a post-war labor force on the plantation economy.
The river was high, and one actually looked down on the countryside. We arrived at Woodland, one of the plantations of Mr. Bradish Johnson. It must be his favorite, for it is his home while in the South. Ralph Keeler, May 1871.
Stepping off the gangplank, Woad grabbed his sketch pad, capturing Woodland gleaming like a jewel of Southern hospitality. Woad's drawings set off a chain of events still evident at Woodland today. Lithographers Nathaniel Currier and James Merritt Ives took some liberties with Woad's sketch, reversing it while adding some embellishments of their own for their Homes Across the Country series. Woodland, the enchanting Delta Belle, emerged as the poster child for the grand old South. But misfortune was closing in. Bradish died in 1897, and for the first time, Woodland was sold out of the family to Theodore Wilkinson for use as a hunting lodge. As Woodland's glory days faded, Upriver in New Orleans, another Southern saga was making the rounds. In 1874, Bourbon Street bartender Martin Wilkes Heron concocted a potent new drink he dubbed Cuffs and Buttons. In honor of the 1884 World Industrial and Cotton Centennial Exposition held in New Orleans, Heron renamed his popular, full-bodied marvel with a hint of sweetness, Southern Comfort, proclaiming it to be the grand old drink of the South. By the 1920s, Prohibition etched a new face on the American landscape. The consumption of all liquor was banned, patrons snuck into speakeasies, and brewers sought secluded spots for their illegal stills. Now virtually abandoned, Woodland's prime location near the mouth of the river made her a favorite haven for bootleggers. When federal agents arrived without search warrants, the bootleggers raced up the stairs, tossing the evidence out the windows. The agents could only watch in frustration. Later, with warrants in hand, they returned to ransack Woodland. Yet fate still offered a glimmer of hope for this fading lady. As 1933 ushered in the end of Prohibition, the Fowler family, which had acquired the Southern Comfort brand, were searching for a picture-perfect image for their new label. The Courier and Ives print of Woodland, a home on the Mississippi, offered the perfect marketing solution. Woodland's opulent image soon graced the label of every fluted bottle of Southern Comfort. But in a bizarre twist, just as Woodland's image was poised to lure millions to savor the new grand old drink of the South, connoisseurs imbibing their cocktails had little inkling that the charming plantation appearing on the bottle even existed. Like Cinderella in tatters, Woodland lost her invitation to the ball. By the 1940s, Captain William Johnson Plantation was a forgotten smudge, a blur along Highway 23. When the Crapels, Jacques, Claire, and their son Foster purchased Woodland at a public auction in 1997 from the Wilkinson's heirs, they were only the third family to own the sea captain's home. Like prying open a damaged time capsule, Woodland reluctantly yielded up her hoarded secrets. A faded fragment of hand-painted border clung to the eaves of a second-floor bedroom. Months of restoration later, the room is once again wrapped in blue ribbon. Gaps in the curved mahogany baluster were filled, and missing spindles replaced. A total of 9 bedrooms now graciously accommodate 21st century visitors to this delightful country inn. Within this pastoral 50-acre site, guests can walk, jog along the levee, or simply sit and enjoy the view. Tucked about the grounds are other remnants of the past. Built in the 1840s, a tin-roofed cabin is the last of the wooden slave quarters. The secrets of the overseer's house, the large raised dwelling facing the river, and the ruins of the old sugar mill await future exploration. In 1999, the Crapels rescued another historic building filled to the rafters with life's joys and sorrows. The 125-year-old St. Patrick's Church was slated for demolition. Part of the roof was gone, the floorboards rotten, and the walls marred by graffiti. Relocating the 1883 Gothic-style church was a major undertaking. After a 14-mile trip upriver, the former chapel was born again, functioning today as a magnificent reception and dining hall. Together, the reincarnation of a rural church into the spirits of Woodland and the transformation of Sea Captain William Johnson's Woodland home into a country inn preserve a timeless bond with those who once populated this vibrant, deep delta region of South Louisiana.
Centuries ago, Native Americans looked on this fertile land as prime hunting and fishing ground. Today, it's a threatened environment. One of the main reasons, the very levee I stand on that protects us from spring flooding. The Louisiana coast is losing, believe it or not, 16,000 acres of wetland each and every year. And remember, the loss impacts us all. The good news is that efforts are underway to reverse this alarming trend. These massive intake pipes are part of a large-scale wetland restoration project allowing nutrient-rich Mississippi River water to flood in a controlled manner thousands of acres of wetland.
Downriver from Woodland Plantation, fresh water and sediment funneled from the river through the pipes, bubble and churns, returning much-needed soil into the marsh. Combined, the Davis Pond Diversion Project to the north above New Orleans and the Carnarvon Pond Diversion Project to the east below New Orleans carry up to 27,000 cubic feet per second of freshwater and riverborne sediment back into a vanishing wetlands. Man-made weirs or dams at pipeline canals such as this, south of Bayou Grand Chenier, are also having a positive impact in the brackish marshes by helping to maintain a delicate balance between fresh water from the river and salt water from the Gulf. Mammoth undertakings like these are already creating new land and habitat for wildlife. Yet it is only in the last decades that we have begun to value and attempt to save the deep delta. Once there were 127 million acres of interior and coastal wetlands in the United States. Fueled by man's need to forge ahead, urban sprawl, resorts, and industrial growth have all eaten away at our nation's most precious natural resource. 40% of all coastal wetlands are located in Louisiana, and 80% of the nation's wetlands loss occurs right here. According to the Department of Natural Resources, Louisiana continues to lose 23.9 square miles of estuarine land per year, translating into more than a football field of vanishing wetlands per hour. As we rush to protect our homes from flooding, building levees to control the Mississippi from Cairo, Illinois, to the mouth of the river in Lower Plaquemines, we also prevented the river from spilling over, depriving the marshes of much-needed fresh water and soil. In our haste to obtain lumber, we felled forests of ancient cypress trees. We dredged and cut over 6,000 miles of pipeline canals or trenasses to access more than 30,000 oil and gas wells. 25% of the oil in the United States flows through Louisiana's vulnerable wetlands. We sprayed poisons and scattered waste, ignoring the fragile balance of the very environment we sought to profit from and live in. Balanced precariously on the threshold of time, this vast estuary of the deep delta in Plaquemines Parish offers a glimmer of hope for rebuilding and restoring this endangered national legacy. It is a sacred place on the planet Earth. Hear the rhythms of nature ebb and flow. From the oozing underbelly of mud, slender stalks of marsh grass push upwards towards the warming rays of the sun. Googles of minuscule creatures that had their origins millennia ago burrow among the nurturing roots. Oysters grow to maturity in secluded beds. Shrimp, crawfish, and blue crabs seek their rightful share of the food chain as multitudes of fish spawn and lay eggs. Fish that feed the fish, that feed the fish that fill the seas. 40% of all the seafood consumed in the United States is caught in Louisiana waters by shrimp boats laboring under huge butterfly nets and trawls, oyster luggers laden with shells, commercial fishing boats, and crab traps strung along the bayous. Alligators holding the honorary title of Louisiana State Reptile, slithering through murky waters, favoring the cocoon-like natural protection of small bays and canals. The snub-nosed alligator grudgingly shares space with an abundance of fur-bearing animals, coyotes, raccoons, white-tailed deer, and the all-too-prolific nutria. The voracious eating habits of the nutria and non-native species are decimating the marshes. Adding to the biological diversity of these narrow bands of estuarine lands, birds in strange and marvelous flight hover and swoop. A national field guide lists 377 bird species commonly found in Louisiana. Snow white egrets, the great blue heron, falcons, ospreys, hawks, the majestic American bald eagle, all call the marshes home. The brown pelican, Louisiana's state bird, and the white pelican crowd together on small spits of shell beaches. These remnants of hurricane-tossed barrier islands serve as nurseries and nesting grounds. Tucked deep within the marsh, Native American tribal members, along with descendants of French and Spanish explorers and runaway and freed slaves, live in the small, culturally diverse community of Grand Bayou Village. Over the centuries, the inhabitants have watched a colorful lineup of characters pass along Grand Bayou, including the infamous pirate Jean Lafitte, who smuggled contraband and slaves to plantations like Woodland. Today, Grand Bayou remains the only thoroughfare in Grand Bayou Village, where a yellow boat serves as the children's school bus. Here, families of fishermen, hunters, and trappers maintain a traditional lifestyle, living off the bounty of the land and inland waters. The abundant waters surrounding Plaquemines Parish are a sportsman's paradise. By day, deep-sea sports fishermen arrive from around the globe to haul in prize-winning catches. The average redfish caught in Louisiana is over 20 inches. Speckled trout weigh in excess of 12 pounds. Experienced guides like Nash Roberts lead enthusiastic anglers to the choice fishing spots. By night, the mysteries of the deep delta's maze of interconnecting bayous and bays lure the avid adventurer. Under starry skies, Deep Delta Tours airboats with Rodney Boudreau at the helm glide into the marsh as abundant wildlife emerge at every turn. Sport fishermen enjoy the challenge and thrill of the ancient art of bow fishing, where hand-eye coordination is put to the test. Redfish, speckled trout, and drum thrive in this hauntingly beautiful and primitive environment. Louisiana's coastal marshes and barrier islands are also our first line of defense when powerful hurricanes roar in from the Gulf. Scientists estimate that every 2 to 3 miles of marsh will knock down a foot of rising tidal waters from potential storm surges threatening our very existence. 6 years after serving as the 26th President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt sat hunched on the sandy shoreline of one of Louisiana's barrier islands. In 1904, then-President Roosevelt designated Breton Island as the nation's second national bird reservation, leading to the formation of the National Wildlife Refuge System. Just south of here, at the tip of Plaquemines Parish, lies the Delta National Wildlife Refuge, encompassing some 48,800 acres of wetlands. One national conservation group wisely advocates, if we will only stop to think, perhaps we will think to stop. The impact of wetlands loss extends far beyond the borders of Louisiana. This is a journey through one of the most ecologically important and endangered landscapes on our planet. And please remember, only man can determine the outcome of this struggle. We welcome you to Plaquemines Parish, Woodland Plantation, and the deep Mississippi Delta.